In the high-stakes theater of professional boxing, narrative is everything. It drives ticket sales, fuels headlines, and turns athletic contests into personal vendettas. In April 2017, the sport believed it was witnessing the ultimate clash of styles. On one side stood Billy Joe Saunders, the flamboyant, unbeaten world champion from the United Kingdom. A man whose slick defensive skills were matched only by his chaotic life outside the ropes. On the other stood Avtandil Khurtsidze, a terrifying force of nature from the Republic of Georgia. Standing only 5'3", but built like a granite block. Khurtsidze was known as the mini Mike Tyson, a moniker that was not given for his height, but for his relentless, overwhelming pressure. The press conference to announce their world title fight was electric. True to form, Saunders played the antagonist, hurling insults and attempting to psychologically dismantle his stoic opponent. He poked, prodded, and mocked, looking for a reaction. Khurtsidze, intense and volatile, eventually snapped, leading to a heated scuffle that sent security teams scrambling. To the casual observer, this was just another day in the fight game, a manufactured drama designed to sell pay-per-views. But underneath the staged aggression and the flashing cameras, a much darker reality was festering, one that linked these two men in a way the sports pages never could. Unknown to the cheering fans, both fighters were allegedly operating in the orbit of sophisticated, transnational organized crime syndicates. Saunders had long faced scrutiny over his close friendship with Daniel Kinahan, a figure who, according to Irish and American authorities, sat at the head of a global cartel. While Saunders was preparing for his title defense, Kinahan was being actively pursued by international law enforcement. However, it was the man standing across from him, Avtandil Khurtsidze, who was living a true double life. While the boxing world saw a determined underdog fighting for a dream, federal agents saw something else entirely. They did not view Khurtsidze merely as a middleweight contender. They identified him as a high-ranking enforcer for a notorious criminal organization rooted in the former Soviet Union. This syndicate, ruling parts of Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, with absolute authority, was not a street gang, but a complex thief-in-law network. As the two men stared each other down, promoting a fight that promised to be a tactical masterclass versus a street brawl, the FBI was already closing the net. The irony was palpable. The public believed the danger lay inside the ring, where fists would fly under strict regulations. In reality, the true peril was lurking in the shadows of New York's underworld. This was not a story about a sporting rivalry. It was the prelude to a federal takedown that would shatter careers, and reveal that for some athletes, the violence of the ring is merely a rehearsal for the brutality of their daily lives. The fight of the year was about to be cancelled, not by an injury but by an indictment that read like a Hollywood thriller. To truly understand the menacing aura surrounding Avtandil Khurtsidze, one must look far beyond the bright lights of American arenas, back to the hard streets of Kutaisi, Georgia. This was a world where resilience was not a choice, it was a requirement for survival. Khurtsidze was molded in gyms that were essentially relics of the old Soviet machine. Places defined by concrete floors, rusted equipment, and a philosophy that prioritized endurance over technique. Standing just 5 feet 3 inches tall, he was constantly told he was physically unsuited for the middleweight division. Yet, he fought with a defiance that suggested he either could not hear the critics or simply did not care. His style was an embodiment of compact fury. He moved with a low center of gravity, applying suffocating pressure and throwing hooks with the weight of sledgehammers. It was not long before fans and commentators christened him the mini Mike Tyson. It was a title earned not through grace but through sheer, overwhelming force. He did not try to outmaneuver his opponents, he sought to break their will. This approach reached its zenith in 2017 at the Leicester Arena against the unbeaten British prospect Tommy Langford. Langford was polished and technical, but he was unprepared for the storm that engulfed him. In 5 rounds the Brit's record was tarnished, and Khurtsidze claimed the interim WBO world title, securing his golden ticket to face Billy Joe Saunders. However, as Khurtsidze prepared for the biggest sporting night of his life, a completely different audience was tracking his every move. Unknown to his trainers or his promoters, he was being monitored by a surveillance team focused on a world far removed from athletics. This was a shadowy ecosystem that had migrated from the ruins of the Soviet Union to the boardwalks of Brighton Beach. It was a domain governed by the strict code of the vorvi zakone, the thief-in-law, a criminal aristocracy that commanded absolute loyalty. At the apex of this hierarchy sat Razdan Shulaya, the alleged head of the Shulaya Enterprise. Authorities described Shulaya as a criminal aristocrat whose influence spanned continents, from New York to Ukraine. His organization was vast, disciplined and ruthlessly efficient. While Khurtsidze was celebrated in the press as a rising sports star, federal prosecutors were quietly building a case that painted him as a key lieutenant in Shulaya's operation. To them, the boxer was not just an athlete, he was the syndicate's primary instrument of enforcement. The evidence gathering was meticulous. Prosecutors later alleged that Khurtsidze used his physical prowess to settle disputes and collect debts. In one captured surveillance video, the boxer was allegedly seen striking a confidential informant, a stark reminder that his skills were being utilized outside the ring. In another instance, he was recorded discussing the logistics of moving stolen contraband. The duality of his existence was staggering. By day, he was training to unify world titles and achieve global sporting glory. By night, he was allegedly serving as the muscle for a sprawling criminal network, seemingly unaware that the walls were closing in and that his championship dreams were about to collide with the rigid reality of federal justice. The true scope of the Shulaya Enterprise was revealed not through a single act of violence, but through the unsealing of a federal indictment that exposed a criminal portfolio staggering in its diversity. Federal prosecutors described the organization as a sprawling multidisciplinary machine that treated crime less like a series of isolated incidents and more like a diversified business conglomerate. It was the closest thing to the old-school Soviet Mafia structure that American law enforcement had encountered in decades, yet it had adapted perfectly to the modern age. This was not merely about brute force, it was about sophisticated, high-tech fraud and bizarre opportunistic theft. Among the most ingenious schemes detailed by authorities was a complex slot machine fraud operation. The group allegedly utilized electronic devices to predict the algorithms of casino machines, stripping them of their payouts with mathematical precision, but the enterprise's greed knew no bounds, extending from the digital realm to physical cargo. In one of the investigation's most surreal details, the syndicate was accused of orchestrating the theft of over 10,000 pounds of chocolate. It was a heist that sounded almost comical in isolation. Yet it underscored the group's reach. If it had value, they would take it. They moved untaxed cigarettes across state lines and engaged in widespread credit card skimming, turning mundane contraband into significant profit streams. However, the operations took a much darker turn with the revelation of a specialized crew within the organization. Prosecutors alleged that the syndicate employed a team of women to target wealthy men in nightlife districts. These unsuspecting victims were lured in, only to be incapacitated with unknown substances and relieved of their valuables. It was a cold, calculated method of robbery that left victims disoriented and stripped of their possessions, a tactic that required ruthless efficiency. Within this complex web of hackers, thieves, and con artists, Avtandil Khurtsidze was identified as a critical component, the iron fist that protected the enterprise's interests. On June 7, 2017, the clock ran out. Just weeks before Khurtsidze was scheduled to fly to London for the career-defining bout against Billy Joe Saunders, the FBI initiated a massive, coordinated takedown. Across multiple states, agents moved in, arresting dozens of alleged members of the Shulaya Enterprise. The meticulous surveillance operation had culminated in a morning of raids that decimated the organization's leadership structure. Razdan Shulaya, the alleged VOR, was taken into custody, his reign brought to an abrupt halt. For the boxing world, the shock was instantaneous. The mandatory challenger for the WBO world title, a man who had been training to fight for glory, was suddenly listed in federal court papers simply as defendant number 10. The highly anticipated showdown with Saunders vanished in an instant, the contract nullified by the weight of a racketeering indictment. Khurtsidze never made it to the airport. Instead of stepping under the bright lights of a London arena to fight for a golden belt, he was transported to a federal detention center, trading his boxing trunks for a prison uniform. The interim champion had been stripped, not by a better fighter, but by the relentless pursuit of the Department of Justice. The reality of federal detention is a stark contrast to the disciplined structure of a training camp. Inside the walls of MDC Brooklyn, Avtandil Khurtsidze found himself in a volatile environment, governed by prison politics rather than sporting regulations. Tensions within the facility were high, with lines drawn between ethnic factions. The authority, the thief-in-law network commanded on the streets, did not necessarily translate to respect within the Khmer cell block. The Russian-speaking contingent found themselves at odds with a powerful Latin American group, and it was not long before the simmering hostility boiled over into open conflict. One evening, a verbal dispute between Rajd and Shulaya and a rival gang member escalated into a chaotic scene that no referee could control. Improvised weapons were drawn, and the cell block erupted into a frenzy. Both Shulaya and Khurtsidze were targeted in the melee. According to reports, the mini Mike Tyson attempted to hold his ground, utilizing his combat skills to fend off multiple attackers, but the environment was lawless. Court documents later revealed that Khurtsidze sustained severe injuries during the assault, including multiple puncture wounds and significant trauma to the face. The man who had prepared to trade punches for millions was instead fighting for his life in a concrete corridor, far from the cameras and the glory he had chased. While Khurtsidze recovered from his physical wounds, the legal hammer fell. He was found guilty of racketeering and wire fraud conspiracies, receiving a 10-year federal prison sentence. His boss, Shulaya, was handed 45 years. The criminal enterprise collapsed, and with it, the boxing career of one of the division's most feared contenders. But as Khurtsidze vanished into the penal system, the man he was supposed to fight, Billy Joe Saunders, began his own slow descent. Saunders continued his career, but the momentum was erratic. His journey culminated in a massive unification bout against Canelo Alvarez in 2021. For the first half of the fight, Saunders boxed brilliantly, but one precise bone-shattering uppercut to his eye socket ended the contest. It was his first professional defeat, and it signaled the beginning of a tumultuous hiatus. Outside the ring, Saunders' reputation suffered from repeated controversies and sanctions by boxing authorities. More disturbingly, whispers of a severe altercation in a parking lot began to circulate, allegations involving an edged weapon and a confrontation that nearly turned tragic. Though no charges were filed, the rumors added another layer of darkness to his public image. Despite the chaos, Saunders remained defiant, particularly regarding his loyalty to his controversial former advisor, Daniel Kinahan. Even as global manhunts were launched and sanctions were imposed on the cartel leadership, Saunders publicly defended his friend, refusing to distance himself from the underworld connections that had shadowed his career. Today, the story of Saunders and Khurtsidze stands as a cautionary tale of talent intertwined with peril. One man waits in a cell, maintaining hope for a return that may never come. The other navigates the twilight of his career, forever linked to the what-if of a fight that was dismantled, not by a knockout, but by the heavy hand of the law